Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Arrowfire, and I am joined today by a man who does not need any introduction, but you'll know him as Simon Furman, Transformer writer, enthusiast, and big part of the Transformers community. Simon, thank you very much for joining me today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, you'll know Simon's work throughout the many years of Transformers, but one thing we want to talk about today is Simon's work for Transformers Day on the 17th of September and what he's been involved in leading up to this event. Now, as we would have known, this video will go live on the day of Transformers Day, and at the Battersea store in South London, a new Titan is being unveiled as a yet for a name to be decided. There's three names it can choose from, but Simon has been brought in to write some stories and backstory about the character. So, what do you, floor open to you, Simon? I mean, how is that a nice challenge, a bit of a blank slate for you to just say I can have free reign on this? Are you given any guidelines to work to at all?
Well, obviously, first and foremost, I was approached by the Transformer store, the lovely Warren, who is the sort of main guy there. And he was just, I mean, obviously, we'd spoken already, really. Once I knew there was a Transformers store opening up, I took myself down there, just, introduced myself to Warren, and there'd already been a little bit of email chatter in the background. So we sort of knew who we were, and, the invitation was there to do something with the store, but strangely, at the moment, there was nothing new from me. There was no new product to have in the store. We were still a little away. I think we're still a little away from the second compendium from Skybound, which would have some
Yes.
of my work in it, or a lot of my work. But so there wasn't really, we couldn't kind of come up with something that, really gave me a kind of reason to be in store signing something. So the little lull in proceedings, and then the whole idea of this Titan had bubbled to the surface in the background. And, Frederick Pham Chung, who is the artist on this first part of the series, had been talking to Warren. I think he'd been doing some designs for some of their shirts.
Mhm.
And the idea of the Titan sort of germinated with those two. And I'm being very oblique with the Titan because I don't want to spoil some of the surprise, although by this point, I'm sure the word will be out. But a Titan, a unique Titan, very unique Titan, was going to premiere if Hasbro were on board, if we could get sort of tacit approval from Skybound to do some comic backstory. And yet Warren approached me about developing the Titan and the storyline behind the Titan. So yeah, and then we settled on this idea of uh, 12 installments of a kind of poster magazine with a comic strip on one side. And that seemed a perfect thing to get me in store. Everything was, timed for Transformers Day. So yeah, just, gradually, this thing pulled together. And then it was, well, what's the storyline? Which was a good question because we didn't really know. And I pitched a few ideas, and I think these were run by Hasbro and quite possibly Skybound as well. And the original idea was maybe to immerse it more in the current Skybound universe, but that was scrapped in favor of let's do a proper retro Transformers. Well, in fact, it's set in 1986, you know, G1 comic with featuring this new Titan.
Fabulous. Is that a bit of a different way for you to work compared to your previous working, Simon? The fact that the Transformers store, of course, is not necessarily directly run by Hasbro employees, as it were, and it sounds like a very organic process to try to get you involved, finding the right avenue to get you involved, and then, as I've spoken to Warren on this, it's getting the final stamp of approval from Skybound and Hasbro. Is that a different way for you to work than say normal?
I don't suppose so. I tend to think of the store as just the publisher in this case, and in which case it's only like a Skybound or an IDW or whoever coming to me and saying, we would like you to do some story work. And strange thing is, this is actually my first comics work on Transformers since we did Transformers 84 for IDW a clutch of years back.
Yeah.
So, it was also very auspicious for me because obviously I haven't done anything yet for Skybound. And even with the Kickstarter and the compendiums coming out, this is the first new comics work from me on Transformers for a while. So, yeah, I was really excited. I've been working on a number of games for Transformers and
Mhm.
still am, and so I never felt out of touch with Transformers and the brand and everything, but it's really nice to get back to doing what I set out doing, which was Transformers comic stories.
Excellent. It's when it was brought to my attention that you were getting back involved in this, and I thought it's not to overstate it, but it's a nice badge of honor, I think, for the store to have your name associated with it. I've been at TF UK Con and TFNation when you've been doing panels and talking about your previous backstories and involvements, and I love the fact that you're so woven into the history of Transformers writing. It is a badge of honor. I don't say that to overstate in any point, and it seems quite right for a new character, particularly to be introduced. So I'm really looking forward to what's going to be unveiled. As I say, this video will go live on the day, and there will be some other trinkets. And if you want to come along to the Transformers store in Battersea in South London, if you're able, I would encourage you to do so. Simon will be there.
Yep. I mean, it's an all-day event as well. So, there are various phases to the day. It's going to start with a big unveiling at I think 10 a.m. And then we're going to do our first sort of meet and greet signing session. Then there's an afternoon session of more sort of signing, and then there's an evening session, which is a much more invite. You know, you come along, and it's much more of a meet and greet because it's a more relaxed setting. We'll still be signing. I'm sure Frederick and Pi will still be sketching, but it will be a much more an easier chance just to have a chat if you can make it along in the evening.
Yeah, I think the all day event is a good idea because it's given people flexibility for their own lives if they've got other commitments, and it gives a chance for people to come along and to meet yourself, which is excellent to do so. Um, just to go back, then, I mean, it's you've been talking about how. Are you able to tell us how much in advance Warren and the team have been in touch with you? Because this has all been to get to Transformers Day. There's a lot of backroom donkey work getting to this point. So, how far back did the discussions go for this?
Well, I mean, actually, uh, it goes back a few months, but this last stage, the all systems go stage, has happened at a rate of knots.
Oh,
I mean, it can't be understated how much work Frederick did on this because the design of the Titan was in many ways paramount, and the transformation of the Titan, which he worked out, in great detail, that all had to be in place and approved, and then really, I just had to come in and once we worked out the parameters, create a storyline that introduced this Titan and didn't sort of blow the rest of the mythos around, G1 mythos about around because it needed to sort of fit within, but not, sort of disrupt anything already standing. So, I can tell you very much it's set in Battersea. So, it's a first, a bit of UK connection there, which is
nice,
lovely.
nice,
And
very,
just
very
generally
iconic, of course.
yeah, absolutely. And just lovely to have that idea of, we're building something new. And Hasbro have been great. We've asked to do certain things with certain sort of fairly major characters in this, and they've been very receptive to that. I think because we're in that original G1 bubble, we can maybe do more. But overall, yeah, Hasbro have been great, and you know, I'm amazed that this whole thing has been pulled together within the time frame, because it really has been at a rate of knots. And parts 2 and 3 are now written, and the overarching storyline is close to being finally approved. So things are moving at a pace.
Excellent. Well, I think just quickly, just don't want to take away too much of the excitement and what people can expect to hear from on the day, but it's around 12 issues that I think you've been contacted to write for. Am I right in recalling, and please do correct me if I've got this wrong, it's to be each issue is done by a different artist? Is that correct?
That is the plan. Yeah. We are, I mean, obviously we have got Frederick doing the first one, but thereafter we will bounce around the Transformers artists, both new and old, I hope. So there's definitely going to be a range of art styles, a lot of favorites from the Marvel era, the IDW era, coming back in to do sort of work on this new Titan comic story.
Excellent. I think is the fact that we can still add characters in at 40 years in is brilliant, and come up with new ideas and new ways to introduce them and to get other people into the community, such as younger artists who weren't there back in '84. I think that's fantastic, and really looking forward to the day. So I'd love to come and see you and obviously chew your ear off on the matter, and when all the unveiling's all done. But we'll save some of the other juicy bits for the day. I don't want to spoil too much of it. But it's been a bit of a bucket list of mine, Simon, to get you on my channel. So I've got a few other questions I'd like to throw your way, if I may. Um,
Certainly.
and if the hard part, believe me, I've been racking my brain on this, is what could I possibly ask you that you haven't been asked 1,000 times before, which I don't know if I'll do so well. But you touched on it on '84, and a comic that I go on about at great length is Secrets and Lies. Is
Mm.
my absolute favorite, one of my absolute favorites. That I pick it up every so often to flick through and read it. How that surely for yourself, and please do keep me on the straight and narrow, but surely there was a lot of freedom for you to write in that particular comic, because you're getting a lot of characters in that you just don't expect. The Autobot clones, Punch Counterpunch, and even a showing of Abominus, but which is great to see the characters appearing. So, how is that for you as a writer? Do you have, is it like a kid in a toy store kind of feel?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, it absolutely is. I mean, the 84 had a strange, Transformers 84 had a strange genesis, in as much as the issues with Zero was only ever meant to be a one shot, or at least that was just my remit, to do a one issue story. And the idea of lacing in the Man of Iron storyline, which had always slightly been adrift and yet had been reprinted in the American comic, the American Marvel comic back in the day. It sort of felt like a perfect opportunity to lace the UK and the US continuities together a little more. And I really enjoyed doing that first issue without any expectation that we would then get this 4 issue series to continue it. And that was interesting, because the whole the whole start of the original issue 1 of the Marvel comic is, the first few pages cover an awful lot of time and incident in a in typical Marvel style, in very few pages and panels. So there felt like there was a great wriggle room there to tell more story in there. But I also had the slight problem of, whose perspective do I tell this from? How do I write Transformers 84 from one perspective or another? Who's the character? There had to be a sort of focal character, otherwise it would feel like a lot of slightly disjointed incidents. And really, once I realized I needed both perspectives, the punch counterpunch character just fitted the bill completely. And then that really shaped the rest of Transformers 84, having that, omniscient narrator who could feasibly know the ins and outs of both sides really opened up the storytelling there. And yeah, I mean, I had an absolute great time working out where I could fit story in, what characters, because of course, most characters were off limits once we got past a certain point. They were deactivated in the arc, so
Yeah.
can't touch those. But we did have all those little possibilities from the Marvel comic, from the UK comic, and yeah, I mean, we did 4 issues, but I could I could have and could still do more if that opportunity arose, because there's just seems infinite storytelling possibility, especially on the Cybertron side of things.
Definitely. You make such a good point around, if you like, the core cast being taken away. And I'm going to jump on that a second because I run a Beast Wars podcast. My friend and I have done recently, and we've just gone over the Gathering comics. So one thing that we really liked rereading it and doing for the podcast episode is that you take away Primal, Cheetor, Rhinox, and then go, oh, well, there's all these other characters that have existed, and you kind of flesh them out a bit more. Razor Beast has never had it so good in Beast Wars in terms of limelight. So going back to Secrets and Lies, I loved flicking through, and like Shockwave, of course, gets a tremendous time, and I love seeing the devious sides of how even the Decepticons don't trust him. That story can run on forever, as far as I'm concerned.
Mm.
But seeing Abominus and then Straxus and all of these other characters, and you're thinking, oh, it's who's next when you're flicking through it. It's not to overstate how much I love that comic series. I think you've done a brilliant job there. And yeah, I wouldn't be at all unhappy if that ever came back to flesh out more characters.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly one of my favorite to write, and well, and until we get to now, and suddenly, we're in the realm of a whole new character, in the whole Transformers universe. So that's very exciting.
Excellent. Which kind of goes on to another point I mentioned, because for Secrets and Lies, you worked with Guido Guidi, wasn't it, for the
Mhm.
for the artist, who's one of my particular favourites. Not to ask you to pick favourites of who you've worked with over the years, because I think that would be a little bit unfair to ask. But is there any artists that you've yet to work with who you would like to in Transformers or any other type of writing?
Oh, I'm sure there must be, but I mean, I've been lucky to work with, you know, almost all, I mean, it's lovely, I would say, first of all, to be working with Frederick, who is obviously I have never worked with before, but, you know, uh, is just one of those amazing new crop of artists, and, Piper as well, just,
Mhm.
awesome stuff. But I mean, is there anyone I haven't worked with? Possibly. I mean, I'd love to do something with, Daniel Warren Johnson or someone like that, sort of just, you know, but actually, I'm very lucky to have worked with most of the artists. Whenever I go to a TFNation or a BotCon, um, normally when I'm sitting in Artist Alley, I've worked with all of the people sat there, which is wonderful, sort of everyone
Yeah.
from Alex Milne to Livio Ramondelli, all these great artists, I've had the pleasure of working with, and I hope, you know, in the run of the Titan comic, we can get to work with some of those people again, which is going to be very exciting.
Well, that, as we were touching on a while ago, the 12 issue series being done by 12 individual artists is a lovely way to do that. And it opens up a bit more partnerships. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that can I suppose, change a story's flow depending on how the artwork is designed. I don't profess to be a writer in any strength of the imagination, but yes, it's really quite interesting to see the combination of writer and artist and how a story really comes to life. As I say, for Secrets and Lies, Guido is one of my favorites. So I was really pleased with that combination. That's a lovely story.
Yeah.
You touched on it a little bit. Is what work do you look back on that stands out for yours as a personal favorite? Is if you had to make a choice and say that stands above the rest?
It's hard to say because I almost have one or two per publisher. I mean, Marvel UK, I would say Target 2006 because it sort of launched everything really, all the whole, everything, my writing, the sort of UK comics integrity, if you like, all launched from that. So yeah, certainly Target 2006, probably the sort of Unicron saga plus Matrix Quest in the US, and especially once I was working with Andrew Wildman on the comic, everything just seemed to flow in a way that, we had a lovely consistency. I trusted Andrew completely with the art. And, we even got Jeff Senior in to do issue 75, which was lovely to do as well. So yeah, then I suppose Dreamwave would be War Within, just because that felt
Okay.
very much mine, if you like.
Mhm.
And then IDW Infiltration, because it was the first time I'd ever got to start something from the ground up in a
Right.
Transformers universe. So that was very special as well. And then Transformers 84, just because, it gave us that wonderful freedom to sort of expand on the existing mythos.
Yeah. Infiltration is one that I often feel gets a bit overlooked because that was where I was really starting to take note of writers, authors, and how a story is constructed. Where I saw, as you say, from the ground up. So you do kind of realize it's not following the cartoon or movie A to B. It has a strip back there and go for it. So yeah, Infiltration, very much a nice read and kind of opened my eyes a little bit. So I was that's a series that I do particularly like, comic I do enjoy. So where did I get to? Sorry, I don't want to lose my point. Right, go around to Earth Wars. um, so you've written, of course, story or storylines, I suppose, is the way to put it for the video game of Earth Wars in particular. But how does that change for you as a writer? Obviously, to be more or less work, but is the fact it's not in comic form and it's in video game form, does it affect the writing process at all?
Yeah, it does. I mean, yeah, obviously, you haven't really got visuals with Earth Wars, even though you have the characters on screen speaking the balloons. You have to, everything has to be constructed to be, you know, clear about what's happening without visuals, almost like a radio drama or something like that. But the great thing about Earth Wars, I mean, before I get into that, the wonderful thing about Earth Wars is it started off, well, I mean, next year will be its 10th anniversary, which is pretty amazing
Oh,
for,
10 years.
a little sort of mobile game that, generally these things don't last that long, but Earth Wars has its sort of loyal fan base. But now that body of work is kind of becoming one of my bigger bodies of work because for 9 years and counting, I have been every time they release new characters into the game, I write the saga that accompanies their arrival, the unlocks for the characters, and anytime there's a sort of a big event game in-game scenario, again we add story for that. You don't have to read it to play the game, but it does add depth to the characters. It gives us a chance to flesh out some of our original characters which we've introduced into the game. Sentius Magnus, Sentius Malus, the Dinobot Combiner, I think debuted in the
It did.
series.
It did, yes.
And that sort of, yeah, for a little mobile game, it's carrying a lot of weight, and and has, like I say, a huge now body of work of mine behind it. And I hope to talk to um the publishers of the game. It's just changed from Space Ape, but it's going, for the 10th anniversary, it'd be lovely to see if we can pull some of that massive story together into some form. So, hopefully we can get something together for the 10th anniversary.
10 years, as you say, for a mobile games, you tend to hear them not lasting past one or two, let alone 10. And as you say, the body of work which just piles up time after time, because I've certainly dabbled in it and played it and know the rate of knots that characters are introduced and the stories that you must have put into that now, that it is going to be quite a back catalogue. So, yeah, I think an introduction of a 10-year anniversary story and special event will go down nicely on that. Whatever could you do? Mind you, you've just written for a brand new Titan, so I suppose anything's possible.
Absolutely, we wait to see.
Okay, so quickly, a personal question of mine, because I must admit, I didn't twig this at first back in the day, but it was a friend of mine who pointed it out to me not so long ago, as I'm a very big Beast Wars fan. You're credited as to write one episode of the Beast Wars cartoon, the final episode, if I'm correct on that, which was Nemesis Part Two.
Yeah.
How does that, for just my own ignorance, how does that come about to write the final episode and of a second part to that episode?
Well, I mean, it's slightly convoluted. Andrew Wildman and I went out to BotCon 97, which was in I think it was in upstate New York. Anyway, Albany. Anyway, that was my first exposure to a Transformers convention, and it was a bit of an eye opener for both of us because I don't think we really realised there was an enduring fan base,
Mhm.
and we had to play catch up on Beast Wars because again we weren't really aware of it here in the UK. And so Andrew and I got together to produce a convention comic book for that year, which introduced the convention exclusive toys, Pack Rat and Fractal. So that comic Ground Zero came out, and we went to the convention, of course, and there I met Bob Forward, one of the script editors on the series, and it transpired that Bob and Larry DiTilio, his co-script editor, had drawn elements largely from Generation 2 in the shape of the swarm, which they evolved into the Vok. So they
Oh.
knew my stories, which was very flattering, and the talk got around to me doing something for Beast Wars the show. I'd never written for TV animation at this point for the screen at all. So, I was very excited with the possibility. And, Bob's, Larry's idea was that they do a very G1 themed episode that I would write.
Mhm.
So I submitted a bunch of ideas. We settled on one that we liked, everybody was happy with. But then that's just sort of not how it panned out. By the time it came for me to write, the show was wrapping up, and
Mhm.
Bob really wanted me to do something for the show after all the build up. So, he was the writer on part one of Nemesis, which was again, it had a nice sort of G1 vibe to it, and he asked me whether I would, join him. So it was a very co-writing experience and write part two. And yeah, that's how it came about. And even though it was sort of bittersweet because having done that one episode, I really wanted to do more. And would have loved there to have been a season four,
Oh,
and
yes.
I could get to write some of those. And but one of those ideas I pitched called A Meeting of Minds became a short story in a little paperback collection that came out. I think it was the early 2000s.
Okay.
So, it was just one of those things. Let's see if I've got a copy. I can wave at the screen. There we go.
Oh,
That
right.
it doesn't really help with the virtual
It's,
background, but
it can't distinguish one prime from another.
yeah, that it was just called Transformers Legends, and they approached me, would I like to write a story for it, and I just pitched one of those unused ideas from Beast Wars. So at least
Lovely.
sort of one of those storylines did get to come out and be published in the world.
Fabulous. I love the fact that it is, as you say, bittersweet. Though you got you into the Beast Wars world, and it was all too late, but still able to keep you in. But of course, it leads on to Gathering and Ascending, which two comics that I'm very fond of myself. And crying out, were we ever close to getting a closure in the trilogy? Was there going to be a
There
third
was
one?
it was, yes, it was definitely sketched out in terms of what would happen and things, but no, that just in the end didn't happen, which was a shame. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was it was great fun to be back in the Beast Wars world. And even though Beast Wars, the series, the animated series that ended, Bob Forward went on to a few series after that, and very nicely took me with him as one of his writers. So I got to work on a series called Roswell Conspiracies, Alien Myths and Legends, a cartoon show, and then Dan Dare, a CG version of the classic British superhero, space
Mhm.
hero, and a few others beyond that. So, it really opened a door for me, and I ended up being writer and script supervisor on a series called Mad Hatter Chronicles here in the UK. So it opened a big door for me, that one episode of Beast Wars.
Fabulous. It's funny, as you say, just one episode that they wanted to get you in, and how it's gone to since. But I suppose to a point that is kind of the benefits of writing with a source material such as Transformers, that it does have those opportunities for people who want to get into writing and artistry to go from, because you hear a lot of people who have drawn for IDW and then they go to Skybound, and they'll go to other platforms available. Doors and communication and networking is key.
Well, Transformers, one way or another, has supported and sort of directed my whole career practically as a comics writer, or writer, full stop. It really has been there for me all the time, and it's very rare since Dreamwave, really, and even slightly before that, that I haven't been working on something Transformers related in my workload.
Mm.
So yeah, I've been very lucky, and Transformers has been very good for me in my career.
Excellent. Well, just a question I've wanted to ask you. I think you probably have been asked this as well. Who is your favorite Transformer, Simon?
Well, I mean, the knee-jerk answer is Grimlock, because I just love the character, and he was one of the first ones that, in when I was writing the UK comic, Bob Budiansky more or less exited them from the storyline, and we were always looking for characters we could then feature who weren't going to keep cropping up in Bob's stories. So Grimlock and the Dinobots were really the first ones I, no pun intended, sank my teeth into, as we could develop these characters. There's a certain amount being done with them, but we can go a little deeper into the characters, and Grimlock just developed into, what always felt like my version of Grimlock, which, I like to think has sort of endured over the years. So yeah, he's without a doubt my favorite, but some of my favorites are the ones that almost had very little bio or tech spec, because they were later toys in the range. And that gave me a lot of freedom, Nightbeat, Bludgeon, characters like that I could just layer in, find a crumb of
Mm.
stuff and then build on that, and Thunderwing and those characters. And even Razor Beast in Beast Wars was a character, I could just create, really from the bones of what was there.
Well, funny you should mention him, because a friend of mine, Lee at TFNation, gave me this little box, gold plastic, so I daren't take it out of the box in case it
Oh, wow.
decides to absolutely explode on me. Randy, as he's called over in Japan.
Yeah.
Apparently, I'm told, because I had the original toy that came out here back in the day and played with it to death and all the rest of it. In Japan, his cult status meant that this you couldn't get for love nor money.
Oh,
He's just
wow.
become, and since the Gathering comic, I hear that it's just he's so popular over there, and I love it that we have to say it could have been Rat Trap's replacement from the original cartoon, in as much as he could have been easily insertable into the cartoon, but he wasn't, and it was down to the likes of yourself to introduce him into stories, and he's now as popular a Beast Wars character as anybody else.
Yeah, that's really great to hear, and I love that. I love when I've helped in some way to sort of elevate a character a little bit from the mass of characters.
Yeah, absolutely. And those comics, Gathering and Ascending, really did that, bringing some of the background characters. And you touched on as well the characters like Nightbeat, who kind of have a very mystique to them, shady past or haziness around them. And so they can be a bit of anything that you want them to be because there isn't that much there. And yeah,
Yeah.
you could dig into that. And Bludgeon as well. I like the idea that Bludgeon's quite, maybe not so much of a samurai, but quite unstable, like almost going a bit Joker-like in his character development. And but the characters like that who have less to them have, in truth, more about them.
Sure.
So, Simon, you mentioned around Secrets and Lies and the likes of Razor Beast as well, characters who you've been able to flash out. Has there been any particular character that you would like to write for that you've yet to had a chance to do so? You've had a go at quite a few, but is there anyone else on your bucket list?
Not so much bucket list, but I'm always, Earth Wars particularly is always throwing characters at me. Some I barely know, some I know well, some, massive titans or prime, original primes. So, the great thing is, and particularly with Earth Wars, is I am writing for almost every character on a monthly basis, which is great. And every saga we do needs a selection of characters from what is a massively growing list. So in a way, there aren't. I mean, I think, I'm sure Earth Wars will keep throwing up characters that I haven't dealt with before, but that's great fun and always a challenge. And of course, there's characters like the Titan, the new Titan, that we're getting to create from the ground up, and that's always very enjoyable just to have that latitude to
Mm.
build a backstory, a character. It's always difficult with Titans. How do you give them a personality? But we're working on that. And yeah, just generally, I just love Transformers because you really, from a day to day, you never know which character you're going to be writing. And I love that Earth Wars just throws, here are the new characters.
Yeah.
Okay, fine, they're in the story. And the Titan has been, just a joy to work on because, you know, as I say, they come with challenges. They don't really speak in a straightforward way. And so we have to find ways around that, but we have to invest very much that Titan with a character. So that's going to be, some of the challenge of the 12-part storyline to make people, warm to a character that is almost like, Marvel's Celestials. They just sort of stand around and look
Yeah.
imposing, but we really want this Titan to have a defined personality and, a character that, we can then take further on in other things. And once it's established, the Titan, who knows where we can go with it.
Well, it's a great point that you brought that up around Titans in particular. You think about how they were introduced as fairly just man-made machines that were city bots, and they stood up. And over time now, and comics fleshing that out a bit more. Well, now we find out they're ancient and they've existed and travelled, and they have some cases city speakers, or they have wisdom, and they're a lot more layered now than we ever thought them to be. And as you say for yourself, you've now got that. I don't know if challenge is the right word, because I feel in a sense it's, as you say, it's building from the ground up. Maybe a good challenge to have of trying to find and thread that needle.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, we're going to be looking for ways, obviously there's a massive size difference between a regular Transformer and a Titan. So finding ways to get the characters to interact that doesn't bust the basic premise of a Titan, these are the challenges, if you like, but I love challenges, and that's where, we hope it sparks creativity, and we maybe get to add a layer to Titans that we haven't really seen before. They are these mysterious figures, so that again to me leaves an open door to, well, there's stuff we just don't know about them then and how they communicate. We've got this city speaker idea, but because we're set in period here in 86, having a character like Windblade in the storyline feels jarring,
Yeah,
because even though obviously it would have been around, this feels very generation one,
of
so
course.
we have to get creative with how those characters find a way to communicate with the Titan.
Yeah, it's yeah. The more you think of it, the more layers you have to. It's not just as easy as here's a new character, go off and run. You've got to think, well, how does this impact other stories and the ripples of how that goes? It's very interesting talking to you, Simon, about it and get an insight into the creative process that you've brought to our fandom for a big part of 40 years. And I can only speak on behalf of the fandom when I just say thank you for everything that you have done and your service that you have done to it. You're no small part to the British community as well as to your involvement with the UK comics and of course into the UK scene, which you have, I think, just as of yesterday, as of recording, been announced for an appearance at TFNation's MidiCon.
Yes, yeah. I mean, that wasn't really a plan this year, but there's just stuff happening with TF Nation. Uh, a lot of stuff around, the fact that David Wallace, one of the organizers, is a big fan of Dreamwave, and they've been
Oh,
very
hadn't heard of that with David for
yeah,
sure.
and they've been very proactive about, looking at that unpublished material from the end of Dreamwave. So it's just, without giving anything away, there is a reason I need to be there this October or November, I think it is.
November,
Um,
yes.
yeah. So yes, it wasn't on the cards, but you know, I love being at TF Nation, and this last one was quite possibly the best ever. It was just so busy, buzzy,
Oh yes.
friendly, all the things you want. So yeah, I was delighted to yeah, okay, great. I can pop along to Reading, which isn't terribly far from me. So it kind of just all fitted, and yeah, just got a few more conventions this year, and I'm done.
Fabulous. Well, also, just to give the floor to yourself, do you want to talk a little bit about your podcast you do with Mr. Wildman?
Sure, yeah. I mean, this came, we've been doing it for a year now. It's called The Rest is Giant Robots. It's something Andrew suggested, and well, I must admit I wasn't completely convinced we'd have enough to talk about, but as it happens, we seem to, and now I really enjoy it. I really look forward to it. We did one live from TF Nation, which has
I was
just gone
there
up on the site.
in the audience. I was there watching and enjoying it.
Yep, and so it just seems to be gathering, but when we'll start to kind of double back a little bit to some of the things we may have skipped over, but also move it forwards, and sometimes we'll just do movie reviews. But yeah, I'm really enjoying it, so we'll keep it going for as long as we've got something to talk about.
Fabulous. I'll put all the links to the podcast and every other bits of work you can find in the description for this video. So do go and check it out at your leisure. And just finally, Simon, can you tell us anything else that you're working on at the moment? I know with these things, it's very much do not discuss, but is there anything you can tell us that's in the pipeline?
Sure. I mean, on the Transformers front, I'm actually working on a couple of other games, uh, with companies. So, there is other Transformers game material that I'm involved in, but none of those I can talk about yet. And obviously, Earth Wars is ongoing. And on out of Transformers, I am working on a series called Return to Skull Island, which is a King Kong series that spins out of a one season Netflix animated show set in the Monsterverse. So that's coming out from Titan Publishing. It's all Titan, this podcast, isn't it? But, so that Return to Skull Island, I think issue 3 is just out, and issue 4 will be out in October. And the second series of Astrobots, which is another mech series, I'm working on, comes out in October from Massive Publishing. And I'm already working on 3 and 4 for that. So there's plenty more Astrobots to come. And yeah, just generally, there's a couple of other things bubbling under that I can't talk about yet, but some very exciting stuff on top of those things.
Well, you're a busy man then, from the sounds of things.
Yeah, it's as I'm prone to say, it never ends, or we hope it
Never
never
ends. Yes, I saw your post on that after being announced. No, it does
ends.
never end in the best way possible. Well,
Yes,
Simon, thank you so much for coming on my humble little channel today. It's been an absolute pleasure of mine to talk to you one on one. I hope to do so in the flesh. I did have an opportunity to doorstep you at TFNation, and I thought better of it, but silly of me. I will make an effort. Well, I'll see you at the store
in,
at Transformers Day, and I'll introduce myself properly. But
indeed, and I hope some of your other listeners can make it down for one of the sessions on that day. It's going to be a great, very exciting day.
very much so. Looking forward to that. You will, of course, find us there, but you will find Simon at TFNation MIDICon in Reading. And that's it for today. So thank you very much for joining me, Simon. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching. And as always, I will see you on the next one.